Okay, Bez Hashem was starting a new year, but continuing the pasuk where we left off from last time. Yeshua Park Aleph pasuk Yud Zayin, whereas the Rishiva would say Aleph Yud Zayin. Kechol asher shemanu al Moshe kenishma elecha. The same way we listen to Moshe, we can listen and adhere to you. Rak Yeye Hashem Elekecha imach kasher haya Moshe. Only if Hashem, your God, will be with you the same way He was with Moshe. So the question that we're going to address this evening is, why are they saying Hashem Elekecha, your God? Your God is not my God. L'cher is the same thing. Why should it be any different? So let's talk about this. Let's try to understand this a little bit. Al pi pshat, and then maybe a little bit more al derech avoda. So let's take a look. We also find this nusach in the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai. It says in the Parsha Bikurim, Higadati hayom laHashem Elekecha ki basi al haaretz asher nishba Hashem laveseinu lasas lana. The Parsha of Mikra Bikurim, which is the Parsha of Arami Evidavi at the beginning of Parshas Kisavai. And we know this, from the Gemara. The Mishnayos in Bikurim tell us that this is the Parsha of Mikra Bikurim. And this is what you say. So you say, Yigadati hayom laHashem Elekecha. I say today to Hashem your God, Ki basi al haaretz, I came to Eretz Yisrael, Asher nishba Hashem, Lavoseinu lasis lanu. Over here it says Lavoseinu. If you're continuing the Hemshech HaPasuk, you should just say Lavosecha, or maybe lasis lecha. I don't know. Why does it say Hashem lekecha? Why does he have to be Motzi Atzmo min haklal to say that he's the God of the Kain and not our God? But don't we say in the Haggadah Shel Pesach by the Ben HaRasha, by the Arba Bonim, isn't that a problem? That he's saying that it's your God, meaning that it's your Hashem and not my Hashem? So Ben B'chai in Parshas Kisavai writes like this: Higadati hayom laHashem Elekecha, hoya roi sheyomer laHashem Elekeinu, v'shalo yotzi atzmo min haklal. It would be more correct and more proper to say Hashem Elekeinu and to not exclude himself. Emunas Elokus, the belief in Hashem. Avol ilu amar kein, but if we would say Hashem Elekeinu, the emunah wouldn't be clear to us. It wouldn't be clear to us who's being mekabel who on what. I mean, it says, I am saying to you, to Hashem Elekeinu. But it wouldn't be clear who's addressing what. We wouldn't understand the intention of what's going on over here. Who's referring to Hashem over here, and who's being mekabel the elukus? But now that he's standing in front of the Kohen with the Bikurim, and the Kohen is a person who's miyuchid for avodas Elokei Yisrael, and he recognizes Hashem, and he knows him. When he says Hashem Elekecha, we remove all doubt from us, and we clarify this great amunah, and he's saying it, he's testifying about himself. He's saying about himself that the God of the Kaim is who is also our God, but that's the reason, that's the one that brought us to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, fine. Sounds pretty good. That we just want to clarify that really what's happening is that, meaning, here's what's interesting. The Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah describes with great arichos the story of how Avodah Zarah, how the mistake, the Toos Hagadol came about of Avodah Zarah. And they were using intermediaries. But then they said, we're using intermediaries, let's be mishtachava and be mispalal and be ovid the vehicles themselves. Instead of the vehicle taking the tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, taking the avodah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu like it should, they started bowing down to the stars and to the sun, and that's why it's called avodas kechavim. That's why it's referred to as avodas kechavim, worshiping the stars, because they became an end unto itself. Now over here, the idea is that the Kayin is the one that's accepting the Bikurim on behalf of the Yid, but it's for a higher purpose, meaning that it's for Hashem Elekecha, meaning that the Yisrael is bringing the Bikurim is telling the Kayin that it's your Hashem, that there's a Hashem that's above you. The Hainu, that the Kayin, who is in a sense the intermediary between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he's not the end all. He's taking it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you look in the Radak in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, Tezvav, when Shaul was talking to Shmuel, Me Amaleki Hevium, they brought them from the Amaleki, Asher Chama Ha'omal Meitav Atzoin V'Habokal Man Zevach L'Hashem Elekecha, Man Zevach L'Hashem Elekecha. Another pasuk that Shaul tells Shmuel, also L'Hashem Elekecha, and he says Elekecha, in a sense of respect to Shmuel, Lahagdil Malosai, to show that he's great. That whenever you're talking to somebody that's greater than you, you don't make that the lashon of Elikenu. You don't use that as possessive, but use it in second person. The Hainu, you say that it's not my Elikim, but it's Elikecha. Says the Radak, that's why the Nevi'im would always talk with the lashon of Hashem Elikei, meaning Hashem Elikei Hashemayim, Hashem Elikei Haaretz, or Hashem Elikei Yisrael even. What do you mean Hashem Elikei? Is that not our God as well? It is our God, but the pshat is that when you're talking about somebody that's above the average population, so his relationship, so to speak, with his higher power, as people like to say, his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a lot different. And the Svarno says over here, that you bring it to the Kayin that should be in those days, even though he won't be as great as the Kaihanim or the Gedalim in the previous generation. Says the Svarno that even though he is Gadol B'Chav, even though he's not as great in wisdom, and maybe he's not a Baal Madrega like they were in previous generations, you should still talk to him with the same respect. Even though this Kain could be a simple person in a sense, even though the only time you use the term Hashem Elekecha when you're talking to somebody directly is when you're talking to Anshe Hashem, very highly respectable people like kings and Nevi'im. Now, being that you're bringing the Bikurim, and bringing Bikurim is bringing a present to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Baal HaKarka, is the owner of the land, meaning he's the one that gave you the land, he's the one that brought the Paris into this land. So then, it's proper and appropriate, you should speak like this, in this Eifen, to the Kain. V'hainu, that the Lashon of Hashem Elekecha is said specifically when you're addressing a king or a Navi. And it's coming to teach us that any Kain that will be even at a time that he's not Gadol B'Chachma, you should still talk B'derech Kavod as if you're addressing the Melech, because the Kain is a Shliach of the Melech. And he's like, he's there's a big shayla in the Gemara, Kahanim Shluchei Didan, Shluchei Derachmana. But either way, it's like the Kain's hand is an extension to be makabel, the gift, from the person who's bringing it to Hashem, who's a Baal HaKarka. And it's not a question over here, mitzad the Kavod HaMelech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the pshat is that it's the Kain that's accepting this gift on behalf of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you will. And Memela, that's why we're using the pasuk, that the pasuk uses the lashon of Hashem Elekecha. However, we still have to understand why is it. So that's very nice. So when you talk to a king, when you talk to a Navi, you use the term Hashem Elekecha. But the question is weiter, why? Why is it that when we're talking to a Melech or we're talking to a Navi, that it's a derech kavod to say Hashem Elekecha? I mean, we saw this from Rabbeinu B'chai, we saw this from the Radak, we saw this from the Svarno. But what's the pshat in this? So the answer to the is like this. Even though every person in the population, the king included, are still Avdei Hashem, but you can't compare the avodah that the king does to what a regular person does. Because the Melech and the Navi are anointed by Hashem, and they were chosen from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Lamed L'Sharetz, to stand and to serve, and to be the ones that were appointed to pass on the Masorah and to carry out the Dvar Hashem, and they're separated and they're Mekudashim Legamri, they're sanctified on a much higher level to bring about the Ratzon Hashem, to make sure His Torah and His mitzvahs are being kept properly throughout Klal Yisrael. Masha'enke, and every other person that has his personal and private life, but in addition to that, he's also Isaac and Avodas Hashem. A marshal to this could be understood to a person who's a Misharis, that person who's a Misharis in the king's army. So, it's in the army there's a lot of covet, and a lowly soldier has no makom. A lowly soldier has no makom comparing himself or equating himself with a general or a much higher ranking officer. We see in the army how everybody has a different rank. So it's a chutzpah in a sense if the lowly, new intern soldier, so to speak, is starting to talk about, our king. You're equating the general and yourself with our king. Meaning, even though the emes, it's true, meaning the fact on the ground he is your king, the same way he's the general's king, but you have to give respect to show that the general, meaning you're disrespecting the general and the king if you talk like that, because you're definitely not equal to the general. Meaning, even if it's true, it's still lowering the respect in the relationship to the king, because they don't have shaykhs to the lowly madregas, even if they're the servants of the king, and you're a servant of the king, just like the general is a servant of the king. But you shouldn't dumb it down to equate yourself with you and the other person. So Memela, because your job is a much lower, you have a much lower rank, whereas we grew up hearing the expression, you're the low man on the totem pole, you gotta wait your turn. So when a person turns to address the king or the Navi, it's not respectful to talk to them, to say that I'm on the same adrega as you in Avodas Hashem, and to say Elkeinu. Now it's true, but when you use the term Elkeinu, it implies that he's the master over me the same way he's the master over you, with the same exact measure. Because even if in a certain sense it is true, but mitzad Kabbalas ol hamalchus, there's no shaykhis between the tzuras avdus of the lowly soldier to the one who's the highest ranking general in the land. But the Torah was mechadish, like this one who says that even to a kohen who's not blessed with great chachma, because en lecha kohen ela b'yamecha, the kohen she'ena gadol b'chachma yesh l'fanis kohen. You should even address a kohen who's not great in chachma in the same way. Why? Because a kohen is a shliach of the melech, and when you're talking to the shliach hamelech, you have to talk with the respect that you would when you would talk to the melech himself. So when you're giving the present to the king, which is the bikurim, so even though you're not giving it directly to Hashem, but you're giving it to the kohen who's accepting it in the sense on behalf of Hashem, so it's like you're giving it to the melech himself, kaviyachol. So therefore you have to be careful in the kavod of the shliach, the same way you would be considerate of the kavod hamalchus. And Mamela, that now could be understood what the Gemara says in Bava Basra, the Pnei Moshe. We mention this in just about every year, but we'll say it different. We'll say it again this year also. This is the pshat and why the Chacham said, Chacham Shaba Isidor said, Oile Loisa Bush, Oile Loisa Klima. Right? Meaning they should have been Makabal on themselves. That's what we said from Rabbi Moshe David Valley last year, that they should have been, and could have been Makabal on themselves, like by a kohen, because then a kohen ala b'yamecha, because yiftach b'dayrei is kishmul b'dayrei. But it's like a marshal that I always say. There's a 10-year-old boy in 5th grade just started learning Elam Metzias. First started learning Gemara. He learns what Teku means. He learns what Yush means, Abai, Rava, all these ideas. Then he meets a Rashiva who's giving shit for 60 years in Elam Metzias. And in his mind, he says, oh, we're the same. What's the Elam Metzias? Now, of course, the Rashiva is going to be very polite and nice to him and courteous, right? But it's silly to say. It's silly to say that they're holding on the same levels. B'chal not. the element sees that this Rishiva learned is durch and durch and durch, you learned 100 times over. With this child, it's the same. It's true. It's the same words in the Gemara, but the Havan is completely different. Same as over here also. But the way we explained before, that the concept is like this: because when it came to Yeshua ben Nun, they Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain were saying that Hagam, you are not Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hagam, we miss Moshe Rabbeinu, and we all do. But the idea is like this: the same way we find by a kohen, we use the term Hashem Alikecha, and that is because even if the kohen is not as great of a kohen as the kohanim in the previous generations, the Torah still mechayev us to give the kohen the same respect. By you, Yeshua, we have to give you the same respect as well, and that's why when Klal Yisrael was talking, when Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, Klal Yisrael was talking to Yeshua, they used the same term that we used when we talked to the Kohen by Bikurim of Hashem Alikecha. Ad Kan, part 1. Now part 2 is going to be from the Ber Moshe, which we haven't said over from in a while, but he gives us a mahalach over here in Avodas Hashem. I'm going to read it inside, I'm going to touch it to the best of my ability and explain. What was this business that they're saying that we're only going to listen to you if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be with you the same way he was with Moshe? Why did they say to Yeshua, Hashem Alikecha, that we just answered our tariffs from before? And he brings many different psukim where it says Hashem Alikecha, when really the pasuk could have said Hashem Alikeinu, and all the psukim tzrichim bir, and each one in its own right. Ela shahiru bazek iskulas manig Yisrael sheyeh kosher v'davuk b'Hashem ad sheyeh yachid shma hagadol lav b'chinas ani Alikecha v'yiyeh markava l'shchina. It's a fascinating yesod, and he goes through it and he explains it beautifully. The pasuk is coming to teach us that the segula of a true manig, a true leader of Klal Yisrael, is a person whose mind is completely connected and completely devoted and mekusher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and his whole focus, his whole agenda is to be miyachid shmei hagadol, to be miyachid HaKadosh Baruch Hu on him, and the concept should be that there's nobody in my life, there's nobody in my world other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and with this, that's how you become, and that's how you create the Merkava L'Shechina. We say in davening, Elekei Avram, Elekei Yitzchak, Elekei Yankiv, and the other side of the Merkava. And the reason is because the focus of their avodah, what their avodah looked like, was b'bchinas yochid. What does it mean b'bchinas yochid? He's going to explain. V'chein gam Hashem yisbarach yachid shmoi alav. Why was HaKadosh Baruch Hu miyachid shmoi designated his name and it was mashra shchin on these people? Because these people, the others, these great tzaddikim that were the foundation of what Yiddishkeit is all about, is because their avodah was the focus, a singular focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeshua had a din of a melech, whose job it is to unite the entire nation, like the Rambam writes in Sefer HaMitzvahs, and that's a pshat why we say in Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. We always heard from my Rebbe Reb Ruvain that Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim, you don't use any words of Malchus there, but the pshat is when you say Hashem Echad, the melech is ma'ached the when you say Hashem Echad, that's the Malchus. V'tira, and you'll see and you'll understand, Shemanig Yisrael u'mishu oived b'bchinas yochid. Somebody who's oived Hashem b'bchinas yochid. What does he mean by that? Wusha Amr b'times the Yudim at base. This is what the Gemara says in times on the Yud. Yochid, kol sheroi limnoisei parnas ala tzibur. Anybody who can be appointed to be a parnas, to be oisik b'tzorchei tzibur. Ki me'avodas hayochid u'sheyomer b'shvili nivra olam. The yochid is that he says, what does it mean to be an individual? It means to be an individual that he says, V'shvili nivra ha'olam, and it's as if I'm the only person in the world. V'lochein hu tzorch lavoid neged haklal kulai. Memela, he has to have the wherewithal and the courage to be able to stand up against everybody else. And not only that, not only does he have to be able to be ovid neged haklal kulai, but at the same time, he has to stand up for He has to stand up for what's right for the public also. Like it says in the Sifrim V'zei Sabracha on the pasuk of Kol Kadosha B'yadecha. What does it mean, Kol Kadosha B'yadecha? It's like the Sifri Elu Parnasei Yisrael. These are the leaders of Klal Yisrael, Sha'imdim Al Yisrael, that they stand up for Klal Yisrael, and they put their lives on the line for doing what's right, for supporting the Tzibur of Klal Yisrael. And this is what they told Yeshua. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be miyachid His great name on you. And how will you get to this madrega that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be miyachid His name on you? When you're davuk by HaKadosh Baruch Hu tamid, and your sole focus will be on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the way to come to this avodah, or what this avodah is really all about, is to be able to stand up against everybody else, and to be able to do what's right, and to be Moshe Nefesh for all the people that's right. And that's Kasher Haya and Moshe. Because Moshe's avodah was an avodas yachid. Like the pasuk says, "V'yizkar yimei olam Moshe imai," which means to say Moshe Rabbeinu was the Anu Mikol Adam, saw within himself the chiyuv of avodah as if he was the entire nation. Yimei olam Moshe amai. Ein achar sheyasas hamutar lulav. Amen anili mili. There's absolutely nobody in the world that can carry out the tafkid that I have to do. V'lechein Moshe amai. And therefore Moshe is the nation. Not only because Moshe put his life on the line for the nation, but Moshe had to see to it how every single prat of the nation was running, and was running properly. Moshe hu be'emes ha'am atzmai. Moshe is the nation itself. V'avodah hu avodas haklal kulai. And his avodah is the avodah of the entire klal. Ve'af masa nafshev Yisrael. And he also put his entire life on the line, shvil klal Yisrael, like the pasuk says, v'm'ayin mechenin misifrecha. And if not, and if you can't do that, then you should erase my name from the Sefer Torah. V'zachali is Merkava l'Shchina, and this is what created and made it for him to be Merkava l'Shchina. K'masha Amar b'Tikunei Zer, like it says in Tikunei Zer, v'dor darga the Moshe kolol tlas avon. This is the madrega of Moshe that includes, that is kolol, the madrega of all the three Avos. V'oid sham, oich shteit Tikunei Zer, merkavta shlemos ahavis b'Moshe b'lchitoi, k'moi dahava b'tlas avon. The Merkava of Moshe was to such a darg of completion and perfection that Moshe alone can be compared to the three of us. Now, be'emes, shekazu hoisa avodas Yeshua. This idea of being kailul all of Klal Yisrael, of being kailul the madreg of the three of us, and putting that together, and to be focused on making yourself a Merkava l'Shchina, is mafurish in the pasuk in Parak of Dalet. Me and my house, my household, my family are going to worship Hashem. That's an avodas yachid. My whole agenda, my whole tafkid in life is to do avodas Hashem. Whatever that requires of me. If that requires me to fight a war, we'll fight a war. If that requires me to make peace with a different country, we'll make peace with a different country. I have to paskin all the shilas for Klal Yisrael. A paskin all the shilas for Klal Yisrael. You know, it's very difficult many times for people to be able to go with the flow like that. You know, they're very set in their ways. You know, I do this, I don't lower myself to that, or that, you know, to make such a business deal is way above my pay grade. You know, there's no pay grade. Whatever Hashem says, that's what you got to do. It doesn't make a difference how difficult it is. Doesn't make a difference how easy it is. That's what you got to do. That's what avodas yachid means, that your singular focus is all about you, and you're not looking at anybody else, and you're only focused on what you have to do for your own avodah. You should know, my brother, every single person from Klal Yisrael has the power, has the echelos, has the potential to get to this madreg of Merkava l'Shchina, k'machakasav haRamban, like the Ramban writes in the pasuk, La'avas Hashem Elekeichem, L'leches b'chol derach v'ledavka, like the Ramban says in pasuk Parshas Eikev. V'yitachin, and it's possible shetichlil hadveika loymar shetiyazecher Hashem b'avasei tamid. That this dveikus that we're talking about over here in the pasuk of L'davka is that you should constantly be thinking and concentrating on Hashem and b'avasei tamid. V'loy tifred machshavtecha mimenu b'lechtecha b'derech v'shak b'chav kumecha. And your thoughts should not separate from this idea when you're traveling on the road, or when you're lying down, or when you're getting up. Ad sheyu dvarav and b'nei odem b'piv, u'bel shoynoi v'liba einenu imod. Avlu lefnei Hashem. Even if you're sitting around with other people, and in your mind, in the words that you're saying, you sound like you're dealing with other people. B'piv u'bel shoynoi, v'liba einenu imod. But your heart and your mind is somewhere else. Why? Because your mind is lefnei Hashem. V'yitochen ba'anshei hamayla hazois, שתהיה נפשם גם בחייהם צרורה בצרור החיים, כי הם בעצמם מעון לשכינה. And it's possible that the people that are on this madrega, anshe hamayla hazois, that their souls are completely intertwined b'tzror hachayim, and they themselves become the dwelling place and the resting place for the Shekhinah. And this is what the Rechaim HaKadosh writes in Parshas V'eschanu, Shalidei Avas Hashem Yasig Madrigazu Sheyeh Hashem Yachad Shmeila B'yichud. When this is a person's focus, this is a person that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want to be Mashur my Shekhinah on this person. K'derech Omrei, Elekei Avram, Elekei Yitzchak, Elekei Yaakov. Yes, it's a madrega, but if you read the Rabbi Avigdor Miller pamphlets, he has a mahalach on a very, very basic, elementary level, how to start this avodah. To think, to be mindful, to know how to focus, to not get caught up in everything else that's going on around you. People get caught up in family life, people get caught up in their business, people get caught up in their jobs, people get caught up with all kinds of other challenges, and they all may be legitimate. But a person who's making himself a merkava l'shchina, that's his complete and sole focus. Now, these things that we mentioned before may be used as a vehicle to get a person to become a merkava l'shchina, and it's very, very possible. We have to understand that as well. Shekol echod roi b'fnei atzmai sheyisyach et shem elokusei olav. That it's possible for every single person in Klal Yisrael that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be miyachad shmoi olav. V'tirem ma she'amru b'psikta rabos mem zayin chaf al Iyov. See what the psikta has to say about Iyov. Kevan shabo Yisurim al Iyov, when Iyov got afflicted with his Yisurim, ilu kavash kasoi, if he would have held in his anger, if he would have vanquished his anger, v'lekara tagar achar midas hadin, and he didn't call out and get upset at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, l'mida gedola, u'shabachas hayabah, he would have gotten to a tremendously high and praiseworthy madrega, kishem sha'omrim achsha batfila, Elekei Avram, Elekei Yitzchak, Elekei Yaakov, kach hayu omrim v'Elekei Iyov. It says a havle gezag bador state in psikta that if Iyov wouldn't have been both b'Yisurim. Now, obviously, we have a lot to talk. We have a long way to go till we get to Iyov, but in Mr. Shem, we'll get there and we'll discuss it. And then hopefully other things will come up. But Iyov also, it's very, very intriguing, very fascinating sefer. Very difficult sefer, but it talks a lot about Yisurim. But Al Kopanim, if you would have accepted, if you would have been Mekabel Bi'ava, all the Yisurim, we would say in Tefillah today, Elekei Avram, Elekei Yitzchak, Elekei Yaakov, Kach hayu omrim v'Elekei Iyov, you would also say Elekei Iyov. Why? Because he had a tremendous opportunity to do an avodas yachid. V'sha'amru b'bamidbar rabba yudalad beis. The Medrash states, Iyov hikir me'atzma l'Kadosh Baruch Hu, Iyov recognized HaKadosh Baruch Hu by himself on his own. Minayin shekenu omer. How do we know this? Because it says in the pasuk, Mechuki tzafante imrei piv. From the chukim itself, I was able to understand imrei piv. V'isa avodasa kilu yechad ba'olam. And he was doing his avodah as if he was the only person in the world. I think the best way to describe this nekuda that the Rebbe Moshe is speaking about, the singular focus, is we have to, in our avodas Hashem, we have to focus on our avodas Hashem in a sense as if the entire world around us is dead. The Kodesh Rizar. It's obviously, we know Rizar's story. We heard it from him. I was always fascinated by him. I was able to meet him a bunch of times. Came to yeshiva to speak. One time sat there next to me by night seder. He spoke when I was in high school, and he said, people get excited, even yeshiva boys, they get excited about movies, and they get excited about everything, was tutzach in the Welt, in the world at large, all the gashmias, all the money, all the fancy things. He said, been there, done that. I had it all. He was the number one, he's the number one entertainer in Israel. He was fried, and he became from. I heard this from him multiple times. He said, they are dead. They have nothing to offer. Obviously, we still have a Yetzirah. We still have our typhus, and we still have our challenges. But what are these challenges about? These challenges are about taking us away from our focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and focusing on the Torah and mitzvahs. And mitzvahs includes our family. And mitzvahs includes, our panos also. It's also for Avodas Hashem. But the idea is that the Medrash says that Yeh was able to recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu on his own. That means that he was completely focused. That means he was so focused to the point that the entire world around him was dead. And this is what the Navi Hoshea screams out towards the very end of Hoshea's Nevuah. Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elikecha. Return, O Israel, until you're Hashem Elikecha. What does that mean? Shekol echad mi Yisrael yagia l'madrega ad sheHashem yemar alav anochi Elikecha. Until every single person in Klal Yisrael can be that one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says on him, Anochi Elikecha, I am his God. Vasher al kei nemar Anochi Hashem Elikecha lashon yachid. Kabbalas HaTorah, the Spitz Amunah of what everything boils down to is Anochi Hashem Elikecha. Anochi Hashem Elikecha is a lashon yachid. Loimar shekol echad mi Yisrael roi shakadosh Baruch Hu yiyachid shmoi alav. Therefore, it is appropriate to say, and it's right to say, it's correct to say, that the idea is that every Yid has the ability, has the opportunity in his life to make himself focused on becoming that person that Hashem is going to say on him, Anochi Elikecha, I am his God. Someone was talking to the Rishiva, Rabbi Aaron, and he says, how do you become a Talmid Chacham? So Rabbi Aaron says to him, to become a Talmid Chacham, it only takes a lifetime, right? But what a lifetime would it be? It's such an experience. This experience of being an Eved Hashem, when you're kol kula focused on Avodas Hashem, it's so inspiring, it's so gishmak. There's nothing like it. Enka the Gemara, it can't be compared to anything. It's so zis, it's so sweet. Yes, it means being focused on your family. It means making sure they have what they need. Because Yanim's Gashmis is your Ruchnias. That's Dvarim Pshutim Adbait. But that's the pshat also, that Kabbalah Malach Shemayim, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Echad is going on us also. Now, we can ask ourselves a good question. Fine, Ad Kan the Drasha. We could ask ourselves a very good question. Where did Yeshua get the strength from to be that person? To be able to be so focused and so in tune with Avodas Hashem that it should be that he won't have any other interests, he won't have any other nothing. He's not interested in anything else. I think the Pashat Teretz is because it says that Ranai Yeshua bin Layomish bin Teichaya. I think it's very, very Pashat that because he did that, and as we mentioned the previous year, a Medrash, that's why he was Zeichet to Nevuah and to Hashras Hashchina. I think that's very Pashat. But I think if we take a look at the story of the Meraglim a little bit, we get to understand a little better about what's going on. Yeshua stood up against the Meraglim. Yeshua and Kalev, it was really Yeshua and Kalev against the rest of Klal Yisrael. Take a look at the Shem Yishmuel in Parsha Shlach, year Taf Reish Ayin Daled. He says the following, I'm going to read it inside. Just to let everybody know, when I read the words of my rabbis, of the Svarim that I have, I try to read it inside. Like, you get the flavor of their Torah. Pasuk steht V'yikra Moshe L'Hoshea Benun Yeshua. And Moshe called to Hoshea Benun and called him Yeshua. Targum Yonason says Kadei Chama Moshe An Basnusei Kara Moshe L'Hoshea Benun Yeshua. Targum Yonason says that when Moshe saw the humility of Yeshua, Moshe called Hoshea Benun Yeshua. Zogt Hashem Yishmael V'higit Kveit Kedushas Avi Admo Zatzal. My father, the Heilige Avin in Ezer, says, Shemiteva ha'onav levatel daitai, al ken hutzrach lechizik. Many times a humble person is subject to becoming a little bit of a pushover. So he needs a little bit of chizik. Okay? I think that's a standard pshat that a lot of people say. Yesh li lehoisef b'zeh dvarim shebe'inyin li es libei amitz b'giborim le'yoshav mipnei koil v'liyesim zeh onav shval berach. Somebody who's a warrior, who's a very tough person, who's very outspoken, very opinionated, very outspoken, very loud about certain things. And you see, he's very tough about certain things. Many times that person is very difficult for him to be humble. He gets very worked up because his opinion matters. Why does his opinion matter? Because it means a lot to him. Who is him? It's not physically possible. Now it's going to say very tifa vart, but it plugs directly into the vart of the Ber Moshe. I'll try to be clear. There's two things that Yeshua needed over here. He needed the meed of humility, and he needed the trait of being able to stand up against everybody else. And he says like this, it's kamat not possible, it's kamat not found amongst people that they should have such polar opposite of these two midas and be able to use it in a practical sense. So he needed a koyach elyon, he needed a hashpah milamayla to be able to give him these koyachas. And this is l'mayla mikolas chalkos. In the Olamus, the higher up you go, the closer to the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu we see. This is a very big shmooze. This is in the world of the Maral. We talk about this a lot. But let's just stay focused on what we're saying over here without, getting sidetracked. We find another person in Tanakh, Arzeda Avram, Shem Kol Chayzek Libo Shaya Ish Echad B'Chala Olam Kechemes Barzel Keneged Kula. We find by Avram Avinu that with the whole greatness of his heart and his drive to do what was right, he was driven against everybody else. He was Ish Echad B'Chala Olam, that stood like a fortress of iron. Neged Kulam. Shal Kenikr Esan HaEzrachi, Milashon Chayzik. That's why the Pasuk refers to him as Esan HaEzrachi. Esan means strong. It's a Lashon Starkheit. Uberambam Kemesh Nigmal Esan Zeh. Once this little strong one grew up, HaYishval Berach. But he was very humble and soft. V'amar v'anoichi alfa v'efer. He said, I am dust and ashes. V'hainu. But how does a person come to this? A person comes to this v'hainu mishum shenikra echad. Because this is one, unifies these two opposite traits. Like the Pasuk says, Echad haya Avram, Avram was one. Whatever the ideas of Eschalkus Hamidus, basically, in short, maybe we could try to explain it now. We understand multitudes. We understand many. We understand a lot. There's a lot of different things that come together to one piece. We rarely ever see something that's completely unified. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a completely unified idea. Now, when a person has this midah, a person has that midah. So a person can say, hey, I have all kinds of things going on, and they may even have diagnoses for these things. But the idea is that Avram Avinu and Yeshua ben Nun, as we're saying over here, would shaykh to both of these midas. And this is what was very necessary for Yeshua's game plan over here when he was going into Eretz Yisrael with the Meraglim. For sure, the Meraglim were great people. And Avada, they could bring rayas to everything that they said that it was correct. And definitely they would try to convince Yeshua with the argument that we're the Rav, we're more, so you have to listen to us. And we have to say that he was so focused on doing what was right, that his heart and his mind was so strong that he was able to be mavatal them in his machshava and his thought, to view them as Rishonim, and he should be able to be mekayim the pasuk of Leisi Achar Rabim L'Rois. He says Achar Rabim L'Hatas, but that's only if they're doing Kedas Torah. Kedas, not with the Ayin, Kedos Torah. When they're doing what the Torah says. But not when it's Achar Rabim L'Rois. V'hu Rabusa Oid Yosem Avram Avinu. Shehu Haya Neged Risham Mefusam. Yeshua's challenge was greater than the challenge of Avram Avinu, because the challenge of Avram Avinu was that he knew that Nimrod was a Rasha. He knew that these Avodah Zarahs were wrong. Yeshua was going against people that appeared to be the greatest Rishivas of the Torah. That they were Muchzak LaTzadikim, they were Rasha b'nei Yisrael. Im Kalan Vasluser Shalberach. This whole time that he was able to wage a battle against these people was all with the complete and sincere humility. Shehu built in move and it's very interesting. You know, the Gemara really says this, but how does the Yetzer Hara get a person to do an Aveira? He doesn't say go do an Aveira, because you tell me you're nuts. Jump in the lake. Right? But if he cloaks it as a mitzvah, then it's a lot easier to fall into a trap. A mitzvah, I love doing mitzvahs. Aveira is feh. Who wants to do an Aveira? Right? But that's exactly what the Shem Yishmael is saying over here, that the challenge of Avram Avinu was, he knew they were wrong. There was no tzad that, he had no tzad that they were right. But because they were Rasha Alpha Yisrael Hema, these people were Muchzak as tzaddikim. Till today, until that point in time, 99% of their lives, 99% of Yeshua's life, he was walking around with the notion that these people were tzaddikim. Now, he has to look at them like Rishonim. So it's much more difficult to unmask that. It's not comprehensible how a person made of flesh and blood can accomplish such a thing. Okay, we mentioned the idea of the Yud already a long time ago, but Moshe Rabbeinu was Mosef the Ois Yud at the beginning of his name, which is also the first letter in the Shem Havaya. So the Shem Havaya and Ram is still the Esopspheres, which we're not going to get into now. But the idea is that the Yud of the Shem Havaya is Ram is the Chachma, which is the beginning of everything. Reishas Chachma, which is before the Hispashtos. Meaning, if we look at it like this, look at the Yud. The Yud is a pintele, right? That's why a Yid is called Al Shem Yud. Al Shem that he's Yehudi, like the Gemara says in Megillah, he's called the Yehudi because he's Kaifer B'Avodah Zarah. Anybody who's Kaifer B'Avodah Zarah is called Yehudi. That's the name of the Yid. We say this all the time, right? But the idea is like this. What does it mean that he's Kaifer B'Avodah Zarah? That he believes in Echad. He believes in that great unity. That there's nothing great. That there's nothing else besides for Hashem Echad. Now the Yud is a dot. What's in a dot? The dot is Kedel HaKal. There is nothing else. Now, you take a pen, right? Yeah, you make a dot in the middle of the paper. Then you take a pen. You can make a line. You can make a line this way. You can make a line that way. You can make a line the other way. You can make a line down. That's called hispashtus. That's called expansion. Now, with expansion comes riboy. Riboy means more than one. Now, even if it's a tolda of the one, but it's still a riboy. So it's the Yud is meramez l'bechinas chachma reishas havayis terma hispashtus k'ma Yud. The Yud is one nakuda, one dot that includes everything within it. The ois hey is pointing in all four directions. Okay, he says this is more of a Kabbalistic idea, but the point is that the hey and then the vav on and on is merames, is referencing different directions and different ideas. Because the ois yud is going to unify, it's going to unite the koach of humility that he needs, and at the same time to be able to stand up against these people who his entire life he viewed as tzaddikim, they're now turned rotten, and he has to be able to stand up against those people and call them out not only in front of their faces, but in front of the entire Klal Yisrael, as we know from Parsha Shlach. And with this yud that Moshe Rabbeinu gave him, he was able to raise them up higher from all the midas. The Mela, he was able to include both of these two midas within himself. That the avodah of Yeshua was that he should be miyachid himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and with that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be miyachid and mimashra shchinasei alav. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mashra shchinah on him, then he was able to stand up against all of Klal Yisrael that were going to attack him because of what he said about the Meraglim. And that's the pshat in why they said Hashem Elkecha, because Hashem Elkecha means your God. Your God meaning your personal avodah. Your personal avodas Hashem. When Yeshua was going there to Israel, see, he had one buddy there, but he didn't got much else going on with him. He was there all those 40 days. It was only him, and he had to be focused kol kulei on his own. And because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu gave him this bracha of Kayash Yesod Anivus. That's why he had to give him that bracha, because otherwise it wouldn't be shaykh him. Because Baruch Hu Shebentos, that we should be zeicha to focus all our koiches on our avodas Hashem. B'schus our efforts and the energy that we put into that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be mashpeh tremendous hashpayis on us. But the ikar is that we should become merkavos l'shchina, Bezos Hashem Yisbarach.